You bet.
Well, thousands of students taking to the streets in Quebec, Canada, protesting tuition hikes. Demonstrators say it's a renewal of the protest we saw last spring. We are told things got quite chaotic in the area, with police pepper spraying the crowd and students flooding the streets. The demonstrations are ahead of Quebec's general election to be held on September 4th. Voters will decide if Premier Jean Charest's Liberal Party is to be re-elected. He has run on a plan to increase tuition fees over 82% over the next 7 years. Organizers of Wednesday's protest said it was the largest planned demonstration seen during an electoral campaign and is a sign that the protest movement is making a comeback there. Joining me now to discuss is Jeremy Bedard-Veen, an interim co-spokesperson for CLAS. Welcome there, Jeremy. So tell us more about how these protests have played out.
Well, this is our sixth large protest on the 22nd of every month, starting on March 22nd, which was a protest regrouping more than 200,000 people. And the last one yesterday regrouped about 100,000. These are very, very large-scale protests, something Canadian history has never seen. And of course, throughout the spring, we saw nightly demonstrations, we saw casserole marches in protest of both the tuition hikes and the Charest government's repressive Bill 12. There was a lull during the summer, but we still managed to stay strong during two protests in June and in July. And now during this election campaign, voters are clearly want their voices to be heard, and they do so loudly in the streets.
The recent protests, the one last night, was it mostly peaceful?
Absolutely, it was very peaceful. No arrests have been reported. No repression has been reported either, in stark contrast with the protests in the spring.
And speaking of those protests, you know, we saw those massive protests in Canada back in the spring, and then they kind of died down. Why the sudden resurgence?
Absolutely. Of course, social movements always find it hard to continue to stay strong during the summer. And the fact that the semester was suspended by Bill 12 made it hard for students to keep mobilizing. But clearly, since the beginning of August, we've seen a resurgence in mobilization ahead of the provincial election of September 4th. We see that students clearly have a lack of confidence in the electoral process, as all three parties who could take power do not have promises that answer the demands of students. And the best way to make their voices heard throughout this election campaign has been and will always be mobilizing and going into the streets.
Can you talk more about what exactly the message is that these students are trying to send?
We were trying to send a very clear message to the political parties. If they do not put an end to the tuition hike, and if they do not access to the students' demands, they will have to make do, they will have to cope with a very strong social movement, with the continued student strike. And that is something that they should be worried about.
And could you talk also about the significance? This is happening now, right before an election, the significance of the timing.
Well, students want their voices heard during the election campaign. It's very interesting to see that the political parties have not addressed their demands throughout the election campaign. Education has not been discussed in the leaders' debates, and clearly it is convenient for them not to discuss those, as they have a very superficial analysis of the problems plaguing our university system, including the commodification of education. We've tried to put forward ideas throughout the strike, and these ideas are not being addressed. So it's no wonder students continue to mobilize ahead of the election.
Now, so would you say that the political leaders there are trying to avoid making this an election issue?
Absolutely, yes. It's quite sad to see that the debate our generation has sparked for months is not being addressed at all. And we continue to debate numbers and superficial issues, superficial promises, instead of addressing the direction which our province is taking.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think they are ignoring this issue?
Because they don't have much to answer to those issues. the programs of the parties are extremely superficial, and one could say that they all share one common denominator, which is a neoliberal outlook of society, which is something students and the citizens in general have been rejecting by showing up to these protests, by voting on strikes throughout the spring, throughout the summer. And so the lack of real debate on real issues is, of course, disappointing to students. We would like those issues to be addressed. And this is why we continue mobilizing, because what we've noticed is the only way to put these issues on the map, on the political map, is to go out in the streets, make a big splash.
And ultimately, what is the goal? What do you hope to achieve?
Our demand has been the same since the very beginning of this campaign. We want an end to the planned tuition hike. And at the same time, the discourse has broadened over the course of the strike to other issues, other social issues. There's been cuts in public services. We want strong, accessible public services. This is something that the political leaders should address. And we also want the future government to repeal the repressive Bill 12, which saw demonstrations being made illegal and student strikes being made illegal also.
And how confident are you, Jeremy, that you and your fellow protesters will be able to bring about change?
I'm very confident. The numbers we achieved yesterday are staggering. It is a historic mobilization, the strongest political mobilization during an election campaign in Quebec history, with these kinds of numbers, with this kind of support from population, because this is not only a student struggle, it has now become a popular struggle. I'm confident that through increased leverage on the government, we will be able to achieve this goal. And if after the election, the political parties don't answer the students' demands, they will be met by popular resistance, they will be met by the streets, they will be met by further strikes, and I'm confident that we'll achieve this goal. It's been a very long struggle, but I think we're nearing a victory.
So you're saying you think you're nearing a victory. Would you say at this point, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of people, a huge turnout, that you have already captured the attention of political leaders?
Well, we certainly hope that they have listened. And what we've noticed is that several political parties have been trying to answer the students' demands in hopes, of course, to capture their electorate. And this is something that could not have been achieved without the strike, without strong mobilization throughout the spring, throughout the summer. And hopefully on September 4th, the newly elected government will be able to meet those demands. And if not, we'll be there to remind him to meet those demands. And we won't ask nicely, certainly.
Okay, well, we will keep a close eye on how it all plays out. Jeremy, thanks for keeping us updated. That was Jeremy Bedard-Veen, interim co-spokesperson for CLAS.